They're inventing problems or making those problems worse through their own actions so they can spend more of your money on them. One case in point with this is all their activity around hate crimes. So we've already said, so they came up with a hate crime hotline. That was a invention of Bob Ferguson, where the hate crime hotline, it doesn't have any sort of threshold for any evidentiary threshold. It's like, hey, if you feel like you were the victim of a microaggression, call this hotline and we'll even give you resources. But most importantly, we'll add a little tally to the number of hate crimes in the state of Washington. And they did that, of course. It's important to understand the trajectory here because it all has to do with just spending more money and painting conservatives as, like, evil people. You pass the hate crime hotline. Calls start coming in from people on Capitol Hill who like, oh my God, I was misgendered by an Uber driver or whatever it is. Chalk one up to the hate crimes. So all of a sudden what's going to happen? Well, the number of hate crimes in Washington state are going to absolutely go through the roof, right? Because that in their book is a hate crime because they don't call police to investigate to determine whether it actually meets the threshold for being a hate crime or anything like that. They just chalk it up and then all of a sudden the state and Democrats can come out and say, oh my God, we have so many hate crimes in the state of Washington, we absolutely have to do something about it. So what do they do about it? Well, they spend more money studying the issue. Of course, we've talked a lot on the show about the Domestic Violent Extremism Task Force. So they just put more money in the budget. There's a couple things going on right now in this regard. They put more money in the budget to deal with hate crimes and respond to hate crimes and beef up the worthless Domestic Violent Extremism Task Force. So just a peripheral search of the budget, $935,000, $1.2 million, $250,000, some of that going into this task force, which the goal of the task force is to submit a final report to the governor and appropriate committees of the legislature by December 1st, 2026, to include legislative and policy recommendations. So what that tells me is they're spending all this money to beef up a farce of a task force that's going to present policy recommendations in December of 2026. And what do you think those policy recommendations will entail? They'll entail increased enforcement of hate crimes, task forces, all of these things that'll just end up costing you and me more money. And of course, as I said, some of the additional money that they're spending this on is going to this Domestic Violent Extremism Task Force, which, as we've reported on the show, is just an excuse for a bunch of raging left liberals to sit around a table and talk about their preferred pronouns.
She, her pronouns.
I use she, her pronouns.
She, her pronouns.
I use she, her pronouns.
I use he, him pronouns.
She, her, Sharon.
She, her pronouns.
I use she, her pronouns.
And I use she, her pronouns.
Yeah, we're paying for that. We're also paying for them to have these hours-long meetings where the only thing that they talk about is right-wing extremism in a state where left-wing extremism clearly outweighs any form of right-wing extremism by exponential margins. So we're supposed to believe that they actually care about hate crimes and people who are motivated by hate when they don't care about the Tesla vandalisms, they don't care about Antifa, they don't care about anti-Semitism on campuses, they don't care about taking over 6 square blocks of a city, they don't care about assaults on police officers, whatever it is. So they have a task force that focuses on how evil the right is. So here's the other piece to this puzzle, something that happened in the legislature this past week. They passed House Bill 1052. Which again, this feeds into their whole money pit around making hate crimes a business, okay? Finding ways, so the goal is to scare people so much that hate crimes are so prevalent in our state that we can be convinced to shell out more money to deal with this epidemic of hate, right? So what does House Bill 1052 do? Makes it easier to prosecute people for hate crimes. Now, under the bill, they made one small change which adds a line. A person is guilty of a hate crime offense if the person maliciously and intentionally commits one of the following acts, quote, in whole or in substantial part because of their perception of another person's race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender expression or identity, or mental, physical, or sensory disability. In whole or in substantial part. So if they think that part of you, in the commission of a crime, part of you was motivated by hate toward a particular group, then they can tack on a felony hate crime. Which, of course, just feeds into what will become the hate crime industrial complex. Tip line is step one, beef up the hate crime numbers with a bunch of angry progressives calling because they think everything is a hate crime. Beef up those numbers, use those numbers to justify dumping millions of dollars into your farce of a domestic violent extremism task force, which is focusing almost exclusively on right-wing violence that almost doesn't exist here. And then pass laws making it easier to prosecute people for hate crimes. Who do you think is going to be, based on the preponderance of evidence, the group of people who is going to be subjected to more hate crime prosecutions under this law? Conservatives, Republicans. And now they can just, it didn't even have to be an out and out, I targeted this person because they were black or transgender or whatever it might be. If a prosecutor thinks that maybe part of you inside, in here, was motivated by hate towards an individual group. It's insane stuff, guys. So this was being debated on the floor. And there was an interesting conversation happening because I do believe that, you know, the hate that we're seeing targeted at people because of their political beliefs should absolutely, if we're putting all these other things in there. And look, if you attack or hurt someone because of the color of their skin, because of their national origin, because of their sexual identity, I do believe that that's a hate crime. And I do believe that that's wrong and it's un-American, obviously. But why is it any less bad if you're targeting someone, vandalizing their property, hurting someone because you don't like who they voted for president? Like, the fact that we don't protect political beliefs in the same way, it just shows, you know, how skewed all of this is. So Senator Phil Fortunato made an effort to, because this is insider baseball, but something interesting happened here. They got Republicans on a committee to vote in favor of this bill because they took out the language that was like in part. So they agreed to do that, and they passed this amendment that made it more workable. And then when it went to the floor, they took that amendment away. So like they totally pulled one over on Republicans, made it like palatable, and then it got to the floor and they just reverted it to how it was. Isn't that crazy? But anyway, so Republicans knew this was going to pass. They were trying to improve it, and Senator Phil Fortunato introduced what he called the Tesla Amendment, obviously with all the Tesla owners being attacked because Orange Man and Elon Musk bad. And he said that maybe we should add, you know, like the protections here for what constitutes a hate crime if someone was motivated by animus toward, I don't know, the owner of an electric car company.
To explain this in a very simple term, Mr. President, this is a Tesla amendment. A person makes an economic choice to buy a particular product, and because of that, they are targeted. It's exactly what a hate crime is. Because of a certain, in some cases, the race or ethnicity, those people are targeted. Well, this is simply a person making an economic choice to buy a certain product or a certain, in this case, car. So for that reason, and we could see what's happening, fire bombs and all this other stuff. That's clearly a hate crime, Mr. President, so I urge your support.
I mean, it is kind of crazy when you think about it. All the things categorized as hate crime, the emphasis on that, and the focus on hate-driven crime in Olympia, and firebombing a Tesla because you don't like the president of the United States and Elon Musk isn't a hate crime. It's kind of wild, right? So leave it to Democratic State Senator Manka Dhingra to stand up and say no to this amendment.
Mr. President, I have been working on hate crimes since 9/11 after a Sikh cab driver was assaulted in Seattle. I've been working on hate crimes for a very long time. And this is an extremely technical, nuanced part of our law.
We're dumb.
Because what you have at play are First Amendment rights, and you have the protection of a constitutionally protected class. You have to belong to that constitutionally protected class that is outlined in our laws in Washington. And Mr. President, making economic choices or owning a Tesla is not a protected class.
Right. But that's exactly what Senator Phil Fortunato is arguing. He's arguing that maybe given what's happening, it should be.
To dovetail with Senator Dhingra's previous comments, it is a protected class if we say it's a protected class. That's the way it is. We simply write it into law. That's what it is. Now, again, we are experiencing people doing heinous acts, firebombs, this, that, all this other stuff, based on a political affiliation. They don't like somebody's political affiliation, and for some reason, they think that that gives them the right to go out and destroy property, to harass people, to do all this other stuff. And again, clearly, it is a protected class if we say it is a protected class, Mr. President. So I urge your support.
Right. They're literally lawmakers. They're on the floor debating laws that they want to pass. And I mean, we saw Democrats pass this education bill that creates new protected classes in a school setting. So if they want to say that something's a protected class of people, they can absolutely say it's a protected class of people. But what they don't want is for any conservatives or Trump supporters to suddenly find themselves in a protected class, because frankly, they want Trump supporters to continue to be harassed on the streets. Here again is Senator Dhingra.
It is a protected class if you change the law against discrimination, not amend the hate crime statute. So until the law against discrimination, where the political affiliation is a protected class, it is not one to be included in the hate crime statute. So I applaud what Senator Fortunato is trying to do, but what he is trying to change is the law against discrimination, and I will anticipate getting a bill with that change, and we can have that discussion at that point in time. So I'm asking for a no vote.
Is there anyone more condescending than her? That's very technical. I mean, I've been working on this stuff since 9/11. You really dum-dums wouldn't understand how technical this is, and we have to change this before we change this. No, you don't. No, you don't. You can change this, and then you can have something that says it's enacted, and we're going to change this too, to bring it all into alignment. But as I said, you guys have been adding protected classes left and right with radical gender ideology or whatever fits the mold. You just enjoy, genuinely, I do think you enjoy seeing Republicans targeted on the streets for their political beliefs, which is just disgusting. So they're going so hard, all these things, hate crime hotline, domestic violent extremism task force, giving millions of dollars to continue to study the issue, talk almost exclusively about right-wing violence in a state that is made fun of nationally for its left-wing violence and how common it is here. And then you want us to believe that you can't add political class and protect, conservatives or Trump supporters because, that's just a change to the law that we're not able to make at this time, but maybe next session we can get on this. No, you're okay with political violence and violence in general toward conservatives. You're not okay with violence or targeting of people who align with your ideology. So just come out and say what it is. Absolutely insane stuff. So again, we're waiting to figure out how the budget situation is going to shake out. And I know that a lot of you have a lot at stake. And it's not going to be pretty no matter what happens. The only thing that's going to fix all of this is having divided government and kicking the people out of power who have continued to spend beyond our means as a state, continued to fund things that the government should never be involved in funding, and continue to reach back into your pockets when they fail to balance a budget. So it's either going to be homeowners who pay the price this time tomorrow, or it's going to be big businesses or businesses in general that pay the price this time tomorrow. Either way, Washington State loses.